All right. Welcome back, guys. My next guest, this is phenomenal, by the way, which is just going to set the stage for the podcast. He bought the original artwork for SpongeBob. He started Hoops Nation when he was 13. He is a seed investor in Pop Up Bagels, also investor in Mr. Beast, U-Ball, Pepper, Beehive, and so many more. Founder of the Buster Agency, Buster Scher. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. It was, we'll have to give credit where credit's due. A good friend, Brian Rappaport, kind of connected us through business, trying to see what we could do together, which I hopefully we'll be able to work together on the side. I was like,
Totally.
man, this guy is unbelievable. Like I subtle begged to have you on the podcast because you're kind of the deal. So it's good to have
Oh,
you.
thanks, man. Happy to do it. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. And we've chatted probably 3 or 4 times, and each time you have different swag. And I love the homage to the Yankees. And what is that also?
Seinfeld.
Seinfeld. There it is. All right. So you bought the original artwork for SpongeBob. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm always looking for, arbitrages in collectibles and really good stories and stuff that plays well on social, sort of that, trifecta.
Mhm.
And, I've owned everything from Abraham Lincoln and George Washington documents to rare sports cards to, you know, original movie posters and all sorts of different stuff. And, through all of that, I learned that, the biggest increases in values of collectibles happens in between the time that a generation grew up with something that's sort of like ubiquitous to a generation and when they become financially mature. And then as long as you have a little bit of scarcity or you own the best of the best, that stuff is going to do phenomenally well. You saw that with, Disney artwork. You saw that with, even Simpsons stuff, any iconic franchise in, the animation art world. That was true. And it's true for cards too. Like Pokemon stuff wasn't at peak value in 2005. It's at peak value in 2025. All, major Pokemon cards are setting all-time records, pretty much as we record this.
I,
And
I
yeah, go ahead.
well, I just love it how we've just like brushed over the fact that like, yeah, the SpongeBob artwork's amazing, but you also own um, stuff from George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. Like, let's not talk about this. Let's keep going down the SpongeBob side.
It's
That's
really not
wild
as
to me.
exciting. It's not as
Yeah.
exciting. It sounds exciting to other people, but that stuff is, a store of value more than a, high upside, high conviction, high risk bet, which is, how other people look at the SpongeBob stuff, not me. But, I realized that SpongeBob fit all the same narratives as, Pokemon. And obviously it's not as big a brand as Pokemon, but the artwork is, 1,000-fold more scarce since only the first season of the show was painted by hand. And I've been buying all the original one of one hand painted backgrounds of the most iconic episodes in that first season. And there's only, a couple hundred really nice ones. And I own, a lot. So that was, a play where I was confident a few years ago that they were severely undervalued. And I posted a couple videos. They went, mega viral, got millions of views through my own personal brand. And that gave me the conviction to go, 10 times heavier into them and make a 10-year bet that they're going to be, 100 times more valuable. And I also love them. I think it's fun and they do really well in content. So it hit the trifecta.
Yeah, I love that. And that was what I wanted to ask the question. Like it's one of those things where it's like a lot of collectors. I have a good friend, shout out to Anthony Renato, that's a huge card collector, had a card store forever. And, a lot of people just do it as stock and as shares situation. But in your case, I love the fact that you like actually go after things that you really love too. And it's just kind of cool and iconic. Like I love that.
Oh yeah, you have to, especially if you have a, timeline of hold that's 10 plus years. I mean,
Right.
you know, this, there's a lot of people who flip collectibles who will buy a card, see it go up 50% and sell it. And then there's a whole nother group of people that will buy something and intend on keeping it forever. And I
Just
definitely
keep it forever. Yeah.
fall into the latter group.
Yeah. Do you, well, kind of taking a step back, like what, outside of the investment standpoint, like was it just kind of like the cool thing? Like as you look in my office and it's just like chaos and clutter, like I have a lot of cool collectibles, but nothing to that nature. It's just more most of the stuff's like my kids' drawings or like just cool artwork, Nike stuff, some cool local artists. But it was it something when you were a kid that was something you loved to collect things as well, or what was that inspiration behind it besides the investment side?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in collectibles. Obviously, when you're a kid, you buy $1 cards and you're happy with that.
Mhm.
But yeah, as some of my businesses started becoming successful, I was able to ratchet it up, and I thought that the reaction that certain collectibles got from people, both in content, in real life, in conversation, was just so great. Like most people have no idea what an Abraham Lincoln signature, a document, any of that costs. But if you put it in their hands, they'll be like, "Oh my God, this should be in a museum." But you can actually get a nice Abraham Lincoln document for less than you know less than half of a used Tesla. I don't know, like just an arbitrary
Yeah,
comparison, but yeah, you can get them for like 10 to 15 grand, like a nice one. And
yeah.
most people might think a lot more, some people might think less, I don't know, but I think when you put it in people's hands, you see sort of the impact. Whereas, I don't think anyone's going crazy over a used
Well, I
car.
think there's this wow factor too of like nostalgic. Nothing it irritates my wife to no extreme right now, Buster, but I was a huge Simpsons guy, still am. It's phenomenal that that's a still running show, but my kids, it just dropped on Disney Plus, I guess last year, and they're not big like binge watchers. They don't play a lot of video games per se, but they are hooked on The Simpsons. And I have to tell you, like as a dad that grew up at the same age as them when The Simpsons first kicked off, it's kind of cool to watch. Like my son this morning, he was like doing the Nelson noise that he always makes, and it's just like, there's something cool. So same for you, and we're going to go deeper into the building of your brand, but where social has led to this and just the content creation where in the past these type of things have been just kind of lost per se, like unless you're a collector and unless you're the people that are kind of trading and sharing, people aren't seeing an Abraham Lincoln signature or George Washington or even a SpongeBob SquarePants like pant. But the fact that you are socializing it and you're making it part of the content, whether that's TikTok or YouTube or whatever channels that you're using, that just amplifies like the wow factor of it beyond like. And side note for our listeners, I asked Buster, I was like, where do you keep all this stuff? And then I realized quickly, like, in lieu of the Louvre just getting robbed, it's like you're like, I don't really talk about where
Yep.
it's at. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
not it's definitely not the Louvre, but
yeah.
honestly, I wouldn't feel safe keeping things at the Louvre now after
To the
that
either. Yeah.
crazy story. Yeah.
Right. But what is that side of things? Like, it's got to be fun, just like not showing off, but talking about it on social and then like amplifying it to another level.
It's funny, and this probably leads well into like talking about building personal brands, but you want to talk about things that you're passionate about. I think you want to collect things that you're passionate about. You want to build businesses that you're passionate about, and you want to talk about all the different things that you're passionate about. Within reason, without stretching yourself too thin. And I think from the very beginning, that's what I've always done, and that's what I always plan on doing. Do stuff you love, and you never work a day in your life.
Yeah, I love it because you love what you do. And so speaking of that, we dove deep down and we're going to keep talking about the collectible side because it's a part of your journey and part of your story. But let's talk about Hoops Nation. Like when we first set up the call for business, I went in and I was looking on your LinkedIn. I was like, no shit, this guy started Hoop Nation. So 13. Tell
Yeah,
the listeners the journey, how it started, and what it's evolved into.
started blogging on Facebook in
Yeah.
2013. And, one thing led to another, and, jumping on each new platform that came out, whether it be Snapchat and then Instagram and then, Twitter and then eventually TikTok and every platform in there in between. Just started posting about basketball, things that I found interesting. It was fantasy basketball at first, and then it turned into other things. And, you know, doing what you love, letting it compound, and, putting the blinders on and just sticking to it for a decade. Magical things happen. Pretty much doesn't matter what you do, especially if you're platform diversified on social.
Yeah. So for those who aren't basketball enthusiasts and aren't familiar with Hoop Nation, maybe go a little bit deeper on what the brand was and what it's evolved into.
For
You've had
sure.
some pretty iconic people on the show as well.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, we've had pretty much every NBA player engage with our content. former anyone that has a social is probably engaged with it. We do a couple billion views a year. We've about 10 million followers across our channels, and we're the largest independently owned basketball media outlet in the world. At least it's owned by one person, and it's a lot of fun, and our team is amazing, and we just plan on continuing to grow it and use it to benefit our agency clients and companies that we work with, and all of our partners, as well as some of the fun stuff that I do. And Yeah, it's really just a social first platform that shares both news, memes, other content, interesting stories and facts around the game of basketball.
Yeah. And but you did it at an early age. So obviously you're a big hoopster, big basketball guy, but was there a moment like that turning point where it was like, "Oh wow, this could be something bigger than just like a little side passion thing, on Facebook or whatever the newest platform was?"
Yeah, I remember, it made no money for the first like 5+ years, but I remember there were a couple videos that just blew up, talking 50 to 100 million views on Facebook. And at that point, I was just, blown away, and also thinking about, all right, well, if we're getting more views than the NBA is on this on Facebook, there's probably something here. I mean, at the very least, the NBA would be interested in hearing how we're doing it. And sure enough, the NBA called and we're like, how are you doing this? Had a couple conversations and have had a great relationship with the league since. But it was pretty funny then for, especially that early on social, because it was sort of like pre big creators in sports,
Mhm.
for, someone that young to be building those kind of platforms.
Now, did you ever want to become a sportscaster like full time? Was that ever a vision?
It was when I was in high school. I won best in the country for play by play when I was, 16 or 17, doing local sports on radio. And then since then, I actually hosted 5 seasons of a show called The Crew League, where my
Okay.
co-hosts were Drewski, Jack Harlow, Aiden Ross. We had Drake, a lot of fun people, Chris Brown, you know, all sorts of fun characters in sort of like the hip hop world. Even outside of that in pop, like Kid Leroy was on the first season.
Oh,
It was
wow.
rappers and their entourages playing basketball against each other, and the average episode on YouTube got like 5 or 10 million views. So that was a lot of fun, and that allowed me to sort of bring all the things that I do, whether it be media and broadcasting and all that, together in one. And yeah, we did 5 seasons. I hosted every episode.
That's amazing. Yeah, and it's basketball, by the way, isn't an easy broadcastable sport. It's not like baseball
No,
that's
it's
super
not.
slow and you got a lot of downtime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really not an easy sport to broadcast, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So a lot of the guests that we have on the podcast, brand guests specifically, a lot of them talk about the early days of social, the early days of like testing platforms, testing things. And here you are. It's very interesting that started Hoops Nation and you had exactly the opposite of what a lot of our brands talk about. You were the guy that was tried and true, that had familiarized yourself with a platform. Maybe it was because of your age, but also just understanding like what's hot, where to move through. What From a teachable standpoint, that had to have been interesting for your side to be able to teach a global national brand that is the NBA, like how to use media per se. Because in essence, they were kind of watching you from afar, like, all right, something's working here. How do we replicate this? And that's for me, that's a fascinating thing from an advertising social perspective.
Yeah, I think I definitely wouldn't say like I taught them everything they know or anything like that. They were just they thought it was cool and funny and wanted to get to know me, and that was
Mhm.
that was pretty much that was pretty much that. But I think that is true with a lot of major brands, even still to this day, where for the people who are early on the big new platforms and come into those platforms with experience from others, you can just move a lot quicker. Like we went 0 to 5 million followers on TikTok in 4 months, you know,
Wow.
in 2020, because I saw in late 2019 that this dancing platform wasn't just dancing.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, all right, let's go all in. And then, COVID hit and social media usage hit all time highs. And, we were right there to sort of capitalize on it, especially when sports went down. That was I mean, we were gaining basically a million followers a month, which was pretty insane. And,
Yeah.
those opportunities do come around. They come around probably once every other year. I'd say, we and they come not just in the forms of easy moments to grow following, but easy moments to grow influence and drive value and leverage the audiences on different platforms. And that's sort of what our agency specializes in, just being on top of all those things for the brands and companies we work with.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one more question, and then yeah, let's dive deep into the agency side and how that was developed. But a lot of what you're talking about, like a lot of content creators, creator economy, they struggle with that like fine balance of like monetization and authenticity. And I think a lot of people, similar to yourself, they've kind of blown up because they were doing what they loved. You in your case, it was hoops, but then a lot of people quickly fall because they fall in line with like, all right, I want to make money, so I'm going to give away. So it's kind of like that balance between like authenticity and like just trying to make money. So like what advice and like what mindset did you have in a place to know like, hey, as long as I continue to do what I love and go down this path, like it'll monetize itself and brands will follow and the flow will follow, as opposed to like completely selling yourself out for money. And then people kind of quickly realize like, what is that balance and
Yeah.
mindset?
I think the truth is the work is put in before you start in that sense. Some personal brands are not meant to make money.
Yep.
Some personal brands are not meant to like be shilling, you know, I don't know, a VPN or a cracker or like,
Right. Yeah.
sunglasses. I don't know, anything, right? They're better off to, you know, build their brand and network to then be able to leverage that for other things, whether that be other projects, a company that they start themselves, you know, uh, being able to create a legitimate show that's on a network. It's often it's often the creators that are in like random niches that have difficulty monetizing, because that's how it was always going to be from the beginning, because there aren't very many advertisers in some of these sub niches, who then go to the extremes and start advertising terrible products and companies just for the money, and that's when you really get into trouble. As opposed to, I think those people are often better off just continuing to build their brand and finding other ways outside of to their direct audience to monetize. And that might be through helping other businesses in their niche. That might
Mhm.
be through starting their own company that solves, need, whether it be product or service in their area. But for the most part, it's not, gambling promos unless like
Right.
you're in the right niche for that.
Right. Yeah, or as I always joke, like the diet tea or black tea influencers, all you're like, you guys all don't drink this tea. Like some company came in and just wrote a massive check for all of you to do and say the same thing. And I think that that's what you've been really good at, is like understanding like what platforms are on the up and coming, kind of finding it early on, wouldn't you say?
For sure. Yeah, I think, it's interesting because it hasn't really happened in a few years now where there's been a massive new platform. I mean, the most recent one was Threads, which, obviously anything Meta does, you have to take very, very seriously. And I've actually seen a lot of people grow on Threads, but and obviously X sort of counts because Elon took it over a few years ago, and now it's a completely different algorithm and platform in and itself, although the same audiences. uh, you know, you do have to just be on the lookout. I think there are also a couple that have come up in the last couple of years that are not necessarily social platforms, but hit a lot of these same points. I'd say, live selling is probably the biggest version of that. Platforms like Whatnot, eBay Live, uh, you know, even TikTok Shop through
Yep.
TikTok Live, are these massive selling platforms for creators. So you have to keep your eye on the ball, but sometimes the ball doesn't really move for a couple of years.
See, I was going to ask you what's your next prediction, because I'm a huge. Have you met Gary Vee yet?
I That was my first ever job. I interned
No
for Gary
kidding.
when I was 16.
Oh, talk about this. What a phenomenal guy. Avery Akinini, who's his CMO, was on the podcast this past season. Yeah,
Nice. Yeah, I love Gary. I just saw him a couple weeks ago.
yeah. So that whole shopping trend, live shopping, he had said watching trends, and I guess we're more conversating than a question about this, but the trends in Korea. But then also, if you take a step back, like you're a bit younger than me, but my grandmother would get herself in trouble on QVC and buying live TV at the time. So now it's just kind of the medium has changed, but the transaction is still the same. Like show me something, and now it looks, acts, and behaves a bit different. But what I I'm intrigued by that one. Maybe go a little bit deeper into it, like the
For sure.
live shopping. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, live shopping is a phenomenal new, not new in the sense of Earth, but new in the sense of apps and social. It is basically QVC for your phone, and anyone can do it. You don't need, the approval from the traditional TV channels. So you can go
right.
on, Whatnot or eBay or whatever, and just create an account and start selling stuff. And it takes a really long time to get started, a really long time to build. But the people that do it are, you've got card breakers doing 100 million a year in revenue that started from their garage. Like it's very, very real. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting because the evolution, and you talk about collectibles and card shops specifically, like the whole brick and mortar concept is almost, I don't want to say wasteful, but it more acts as like a showroom locally, but the true revenue is coming through these platforms and how you transact. You said something a second ago. The Your mentality obviously had to have been the long game, and you're fairly young, so the expectations of a lot of creators and just a lot of people in general that are trying to build their brand. Touch on how that just patience mindset, and not thinking like, hey, the next thing's right here and then I'm going to make it and catapult off. Like that patient mindset, and how you've kind of been diligent throughout, and maybe there were bumps in the road that you've kind of learned from that you want to share as well.
I think I was lucky to have been exposed to Gary when I was like 14 years old. I met him when I was 15, and then I worked at
Wow.
Vayner when I was 16. And he always, preached the patience. So from a very young age, I was like, all right, give me, 30 years of doing this. Let's see what happens. And, I'm going to, it's like the balance of going really hard every day, but also having patience for, the results that you want to see. And, I think it's especially important in social, and it's rare because nowadays it's just in your face everywhere because the news is man or woman starts app 250K MRR in 3 months.
Right.
That was
Yep.
never me, you know, and it might not even be them either, but it's what gets, the headline. And then it makes people think they need to take shortcuts and do things faster, but that's never the answer. You gotta, and that's also why a lot of people don't start building their personal brand or their media brands because of, it is the hardest at the start. Just like how money compounds, and the second million is, 10 times easier than the first. It's like, the same thing is true with audiences and followings and, building communities. The beginning is, 10 times more difficult than the second leg.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is like defining what success is for you. Like it's how has that been a motivator throughout? Like I guess early days, you being a creator and then also owning multiple businesses, investing in things, like your definition of success has to have changed from day one. It was probably like, dude, look at this. We have 100,000 million, 10 million people subscribing or watching or liking. Like that definition of success has had to have evolved, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a bad student, my definition of success was like to not have to go to college, because I just
Nice.
didn't want to. I just didn't want to do it. So I needed to get things to a point by the time when I was, 17, 18, where, my family and people around me were like, "Oh yeah, I get it. He's making the right choice by not going." And I was able to get there barely, and didn't go to college, didn't even apply, and then after that, it was all right. How do we, turn this into a business that can allow me to live by myself in New York? And then did that. And then it was all right. How do we, build a staff and a team? And then, how do we continue to compound year over year and, build this holding company. It's funny, like you'll learn pretty much everything you need to know about me through what my collections are. I have a really big SpongeBob collection, and I have a really big Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger signed documents, collectibles, letters collection. And I want to be somewhere in between SpongeBob and Buffett. And maybe a little bit of Lincoln and Washington. That's like my Mount Rushmore.
That's
And
pretty cool.
I think Buffett is such a great example of finding something you love and doing it for your entire life. And he did it through Berkshire, which is effectively the biggest holding company in the world that has like hundreds of businesses, public, private, all sorts. And then just continue to compound it. And I want to, do the same thing, but not with, necessarily with stocks, but with like building our own projects and having them all under a holding company and having, full control of that forever. Because there have been countless times where, companies have approached about acquiring different, assets or pieces of our business. And, the answer is I just want to, sort of emulate what, guys like Buffett and Gary and, others have done.
How have you balanced? And I know we said we are going to get to it, so maybe we dive right in. How do you balance all of this? Because it's most people's LinkedIn, it's kind of like maybe you have a one or two things that you dabble in, but then your career starts and ends, starts and ends, starts and ends. But for you, you have multiple balls in the air that you're juggling while running very successful businesses. So maybe dive in a little bit deeper into the Buster Agency, what it is, what you guys do, and then touch on
For
that.
sure.
Like, it's
Yeah,
probably who
so
you surround yourself with.
we do a lot of different things. Everything from operating media companies like Hoops Nation to running the socials, digitals, and creating content for startups, to distribution for Fortune 500 type companies, where we'll take their best content and then distribute it in all the best places across the internet that are going to reach the audiences that they're trying to reach for, cheaper, higher upside, and, more efficiently than any other advertising medium possible. And we've been able to, continue to expand that offering. And it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, we pretty much every year since we've started, we've just, you know, kept on growing both our team and the companies we're able to help.
Yeah. So you and I met, and Kelly Peppers, our president for Colossal Lamar's, know what we even call them, but our wall hand paint company that we
Yeah,
purchased a couple
she's
of years
great.
back. Yeah, she's phenomenal. So maybe use that as an example. So a lot of what we do in the out of home space, it's very iconic, especially with the hand paint stuff. But even just like the traditional side of a billboard or a subway ad or a transit ad or an airport ad, like it's very in the moment, static, point of interest. Maybe there's some dynamic elements to it, but one of the unique things, propositions that you brought to us is like, how do you amplify that beyond social? And so maybe
Exactly.
give our listeners a little bit deeper on how you would take a brand in the out of home space and just amplify it beyond just, something going viral or someone taking a picture of a hand painted wall.
Yeah, for sure. So let's come up with a very specific example. Let's say that there was an artist that was performing at Madison Square Garden, and they, contracted you guys to do a giant wall mural of that artist. We would then take photos, videos, other content of that wall, format it in a way that it'll perform really, really well on the specific niche pages that we're going to put it on. Let's just say the artist is, let's say the artist is Drake, because we talked about him earlier. We would then find pages that are both dedicated specifically to Drake, specifically to music, and specifically to New York, both that are already in our network that we own and that we have partnerships with, and then seed that content specifically on those pages. So now it goes from being a wall in one place to creative in all different formats, in carousels, in videos, in static images that are on all of these different audiences, but reaching all the exact very specific people that you're looking for. And then to the advertiser, it's all this additional value because you've now brought social into the fold through the same already approved content that went up on the wall. So that would be like a one-off example. Now multiply that by 100 or 1,000 across the whole United States or world. And that's sort of what we do.
Yeah. And it's really just talking to the right consumers where they want to be spoken to, right? And I think
And
that's
in the
we
format that's like authentic,
yeah,
because I mean, you know as well as anybody, like when people are walking, they're all on their phones. They're not looking up. They're like walking into cars and walking all over the place. They're all looking at their phones. So why don't you reach them there, on top of, the people that are looking up.
yeah. And then so beyond just the out of home play side of things, it's just really I think oftentimes where brands miss out is they'll pinpoint one platform or network and they'll just kind of hone in on that. And maybe so talk a little bit about that, the how different consumers are, I spend most of my time on Instagram when I am in social. Never am on the book face ever. But I'm not a big TikTok guy. But talk about that, how you guys help navigate brands on making sure that content is relevant in the right format. So when you say format, what works on Instagram and what works on Instagram Reels is different than what works on TikTok, what works on different other platforms. But touch on that, like how brands oftentimes miss on that and why the guidance like the Buster Agency is so important.
Yeah, I think part of it is that, people assume that the same content works on all platforms, or they're just not making and testing enough. And it's also, not enough to just post it on your own platform. You need to be seeding that content, or, what some people call it, clipping that content and putting it in all the other most relevant places that are specific to that individual piece of content to give it those boosts on each platform. Um, and there are some brands that do it phenomenally well and really understand it. There are others that get it at times. And then there's some brands where you'll look at and be like, wow, they're not trying. And, I think that's, sort of been our sweet spot into, really helping brands that we think have great upside, uh, catalogs, and, that we also own the audiences that can, directly, immediately benefit them.
Yeah. And what does that evolution of the audience look like across social? I know that's the constant battle within these platforms is they want to make sure they're as relevant as possible. So, you know, it, Instagram's you'd mentioned kind of obviously reels and then threads. What what drives that? And they're trying to keep audiences engaged and not want to jump to the other platform, but also not replicate exactly what TikTok was doing, but we want to have some variation. But what's the ultimate driver there, outside of just attention?
I think there's an element of overcomplicating things. At the end of the day, amazing content is what every single platform is looking for, but they're just like looking for it in slightly different form factors. So you just need to be able to, and this is what we, do really well, is take a piece of content that's, let's say, a video piece that's 10 minutes long. That's a great YouTube long form video. Now we need to pick the best moments out of that are 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds for TikTok, YouTube shorts, threads, Facebook, Instagram reels. And then we need to take that and extract out what are 5 text lines that we could put on LinkedIn, Twitter or X, and Threads, and potentially even other platforms. So it's the combination of all of that comes together and sort of manifests itself as getting the best result possible for a great piece of content. But at the end of the day, creating great content comes first, and you know everything else comes second.
I recall whenever Instagram first came out, I think one of the first Instagram ads, you used to actually, Instagram would have to approve what ad, and they were very meticulous. And I think Lexus was one of the first ever ads that were approved. And that was the biggest thing. It's like the beauty, the content, the photography, the motion, everything had to be at the top. Now that's like table stakes. Like everyone has to have that. So when you talk about, and this may be kind of tapping in more into the Gary side of things as well, because the big thing about Gary is he's like, shoot it, who cares? Take that content and that shot. Now, obviously, that works better on certain platforms, but what's your mindset around that? Like if you want to just go live and start talking live on Instagram, how do you help brands make sure that they're not like they're keeping their brand very clean, but also that mindset of like going live and not having to stress about the graphics and the look and the background. Like, it's content. And if it's consumable and it's powerful in the moment, then go.
Yeah, I think the reality is that, most brands do take themselves too seriously,
Mhm.
especially when they don't already have huge audiences. It's like, all right, if the content doesn't work, nobody sees it, you know? So you have to experiment within reason and try a lot of different things and do it as quickly as possible to find what sort of series and formats work on each platform. So then you can really scale and build them out and do as many as possible, really. But I do, a lot of brands do fall into the trap of just wanting their, you know, socials to look really, really clean
Mhm.
and for that to be the only thing. And that's just a very, 10-year-old strategy that,
Yeah.
you need to be a lot more experimental. And then you layer in all the other stuff on top of that, like the distribution, like the formatting, like great
Mhm.
series, like partnering with creators, all that. And that's where you really, you know, hit growth.
And I think it just brings like the authenticity side of things. Like if everything has to be shot in like 4K and it's like this whole production, you're like, all right, you're literally trying to sell me something, but your CEO or your brand ambassador is like talking to me as if like you're at the UN. Like just go live. Like I've always loved that aspect. And if you have to have it clean, like just drop like a little small logo into your live video.
Yeah, totally.
Um, yeah. I mean, it's always baffled me because you see this and it's like you miss out on like massive moments as well because if you have to go back to production you have to do all these things. So is that a challenge with a lot of the brands that you work with? It's like, hey guys, just trust me, this is the path that we can go. You can still create phenomenal 4K content and all the right things, but still go live and make sure you're authentic in your voice.
Yeah, I think in terms of the companies and brands we work with, they're for the most part very forward thinking, and that's why they're even open to working with us as opposed to like an older, bigger traditional agency
Mhm.
that will, sort of just do whatever they ask and not really care about the results.
Right.
I think if someone's going to work with us, they're pretty forward thinking to begin with, just because of we're a small lean team. We only work with so many companies at a given time, and we're practitioners more than like preachers.
Yeah. What it, and again, going back to the balance conversation, how do you balance? Is it your team? Is it your time? Like, how do you balance your time with all the things that you have going on?
This is what I love to do. There's nothing else that I'd rather be doing. So I'm gonna, spend as much time every day on making this the best, making each project that we're working on as good as possible. And, the team has a huge, part to do with that, and how we structure everything has a huge part to do with that. And being a lean, super connected team, that's a lot to do with that too. Um, I think it's all the above, and growth is fun and exciting, and gets everybody out of bed. So I think the combination of all those things, plus we work with really cool brands on really cool content in the areas that we're passionate about, whether it
Yeah.
be sports or marketing or collectibles or any of these primary categories that we focus on. And that's what keeps me going every day. And I've been doing it for 12 years now, not the agency but social,
Mhm.
and definitely plan on continuing to do it for another 12, 24 plus.
I love it, especially if you're going to hit that Warren Buffett status. You got to get after it.
Oh
How do
yeah,
you?
I'm 25, he's 94, so
Yeah,
yeah,
you got
way
some
to go.
time. Almost 75. Side note: they invested in Lamar a significant amount of money a couple of months ago, which is
I'm aware. Yeah,
yeah
that's
a
very
good
cool.
asset. I'm not allowed to push that you should invest in Lamar, but it definitely leads me to my next conversation with
I
you.
can
Like
say that it's the best cosign you can get in the world.
without a doubt, yeah, there you go. I mean, I read the book Snowball, so it's kind of like, all right, this is cool. Uh,
That's a good one.
biggest
Yeah,
biggest
there's
book that I've ever
wild
read.
chapters in that book, but that's a good
Yeah,
one.
without a doubt. What and I guess playing along with that, right? So out of home, obviously we've constantly evolved, and we're in the very early days. It was very nostalgic, and it had a period where people were like, digital is more important. We've evolved as a company and as an industry. But in your world, specifically in the social side of things, I always my litmus test, Buster, is always my 13-year-old triplets and 11-year-old little guy. Like they grew up their whole lives. None of them have social media channels, but a lot of their friends do. They have their own channels, but they don't engage in them and whatnot. But they grew up their whole lives. Like their nanny was doing TikTok reels with them at the age of like 4 or 5. So do you see this shift? Kind of like you're very big into like nostalgic art collectibles and that next generation coming in. Do you see social having to shift and change for a generation that completely grew up with this, mass social consumption? Like face to face becomes more relevant, becomes more meaningful, but do you see social media companies starting to take this serious, or is it just kind of like we got these people locked in and we're going to have a chip in their head and we're going to have a glass eye over their content's going to feed straight into their brain mentality?
I think
Two
that,
extremes.
you know, like AI and robotics and every other, emerging technology, they're all the worst that they'll ever be right now.
Yeah.
So the algorithms are going to continue getting better, the platforms are going to continue getting better. There might be some more competition in the marketplace. I think the AI generated video social platforms like Sora are very interesting and do, pose legitimate threats to the TikToks and the like. Um, but, I think whatever that is, that's the importance of being well diversified across the internet. I know that social connection and whatever form of social exists in the future will be used by more people by virtue of, let's say Meta has about 3 billion users now. I don't know, there's like 8 point something billion on the planet.
Mhm.
As older generations go and younger generations come in, that's still probably 2x growth across the world for these social platforms that's left just in terms of existing population, not accounting for like population growth, which in some countries is really, really fast. So I think that 10 years from now, there will be 5 billion users on social media, so almost double. In 25 years, it'll probably be 6 billion users. In 30
Mhm.
years, it'll probably be like 7 or 8 billion, maybe 10 billion. And, the tools are going to be infinitely better. The barrier of entry is going to continue to get lower. It's not going to get higher for content creation, brand building, all that stuff. And there's, going to be more platforms. I think there is some truth to like the fragmentation by niche, but
Mhm.
net, I think that's a good thing for everyone that isn't, a huge, total addressable market creator.
And I guess that's kind of the point, right? Is even in our lifetime, we've seen, where Facebook dominated, where and Facebook being both Meta having Instagram as well. But it's interesting to watch Instagram take line share, and then even within my kids and how they communicate, so different. And they're talking about certain platforms, and you're like, wait, what platform? So I love your comment about like the diversification based off of niche audiences. So it's almost like it becomes the way is social, but social looks significantly different than, we'll call like the big four that just dominate the social ecosystem.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be more platforms and, a heck of a lot more tools for, creators and brands in the future. But yeah, as of right now, there hasn't been that much change in the last couple years. I mean, there have been some things, but it's been pretty consistent. I think for the next couple years, it'll continue to be fairly consistent. But more than like 2 or 3 years out, I think we could see some pretty drastic
Yeah.
platform change.
What is you kind of talked to briefly about like content and AI. Where do you think that world plays? Cause that's my biggest fear and joy is like obviously how AI works, the importance of creating efficiencies and all those things, but it's a wild world. especially with my kids as well and myself included, where you're like, is that was that AI or is that real? And again, it's your point, like this is the worst that it's going to be. So if you can figure out like, oh, that's AI, do you what's your thoughts on that? Like, is there a fear of like what's real and what's not? What needs to be done?
You
Should there
know,
be some sort of like watermark that you have to have? Or what is your thoughts on that?
it's funny when, you know, because I've been on social, now for 12 years, and people were always asking, is that real or not? But not whether it's AI or not, whether it was like staged or not, whether it was
Mm.
scripted or not, whether it
Yep.
was like a real reaction or not, whether that, highlight was legit or not, whatever.
Dude, perfect. Insert. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, people have been asking these questions the whole time, and now it's just another form of asking those same questions. And, to me, as long as it's not something that is important, it doesn't matter. I think if it's, statements about companies and stocks and politicians, then it starts to matter and there should be regulation around that. But if it's a dog video and the dog jumps 2 feet higher, like, I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me. I think it's, as long as you're entertained, it's no different than, something that was scripted and shot. I think the other side of AI, which is so exciting, is, the potential for efficiencies within companies, the potential to cure all diseases, the potential for, robotics to help, people in their homes who are unable to help themselves. Like the amount of different things that are amazing that AI is going to do in the next decade just so outweigh to me like, you know, worrying about social videos, which I think to the fast adopters is a huge competitive advantage. Like, you know, sure, it will for sure hurt some jobs and careers, but it'll create others. And, the barrier to entry for the startup company with a product is so much lower now that they can
Oh yeah.
have, a model, using their product and talking about it in a video that's indistinguishable. Whereas before, they would have to go out and basically license a human, which is like effectively what paying someone to say something is.
Right.
And that wasn't real. As like we talked about earlier, we were talking about like, do all those people drink the tea or do they not drink the tea? Nobody
Mhm.
ever drank the tea, whether it's AI or not.
Right. Sure.
It's
Sure.
like, for the most part, there's no difference. But I think it also, on the flip side, the value of real, authentic personal brands and live events goes up for sure, long term.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great balance, especially in the world of what social is doing is it's I don't want to use educate, but it's educating and informing, but most importantly, it's entertaining you. Like we had a guest on the podcast that said he literally faked photoshopped the fish because he's a big fisherman, and he photoshopped this giant fish that he caught, and he was like, I've never gone viral before, didn't even know how to go viral, and this thing absolutely blew up, and he had friends from high school telling him, and shout out to a guy from founder of Elk, and he was like, dude, it blew up, and I finally felt so bad because like a fishing company was like, hey, did you really catch that fish? He's like, no, man, that was actually just a joke. I didn't mean for this to go where it went.
That's
So
so
again, for the yeah, but like I was listening to Joe Rogan this morning. He was talking about that. Like AI is always or faking people out has always existed. It's just like
yeah.
it's an entertainment value behind it. If it's something serious, then you probably shouldn't be getting your news from influencer XYZ that's also posting just outlandish videos. Like there's a fine balance in this world.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. So yeah, but I love the nostalgic side because it is cool to watch, especially again, not to beat this idea to death, but like a lot more kids that I see, coaching basketball, like these little kids would rather now put down like Fortnite and just come like go play in the neighborhood and like build out a baseball team and create a league. And they're like, hey guys, let's get together. And that part's super cool, but also understanding like the benefits. Like I look at yourself and you're probably using a lot of AI that you would have never been able to build your company and your brand and balance all these things, investments and collectibles if you didn't have some sort of efficiencies that were offset by this.
Yeah, and I think, it's not just like LLMs and video and photo generation, but it's
Yeah.
simple things like, AI being integrated in the email
Yep.
platform that I use and all that sort of stuff. So it's integrated in a lot more than we all think. There's not a person in America that doesn't use AI in some way, shape, or form without knowing it.
Right. Without a doubt. Well, kind of as we wrap up here, your last couple of minutes, brand building is something that you've inherently just adopted as your own because you've built out this brand. As I'd mentioned, each one of us when we walk into a room, there's something authentic about us that's kind of like draws people to you. I, I don't think I've ever told this story on the podcast, but I do a lot of speaking for the company I work for, and for whatever reason, I've always worn a blazer and sneakers because I'm a considered air quote sneakerhead. And for this one conference, for whatever reason, I wore like some Cole Haan, like still sneaker Cole Haans. And some guy that I didn't even know walked up and was like, bro, aren't you wearing your sneakers? Like I was expecting this. So similar to you, what is that underlying brand that is Buster beyond just the agency, the collectible side? But what is it that's authentic about you that people would be able to just like recognize?
Um, I think it is sort of like an amalgamation of like all the things that I create content about, which is just like super obscure stories that I just dive super deep on, super obscure companies and stories that I just go super deep on. And that falls under, sort of everything that I do. I think everything I do is very, authentic to who I am and even, the companies that I work with and like, so yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything, but a lot of what we talked about falls under that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, I met some of your team on an initial call, and it's how who you surround yourself around with as well is equally as important as the tech and as the brand of yourself.
For
All
sure.
right, yeah. Last question: what is the one collectible? And it can't be SpongeBob or the Abraham Lincoln or DC, but what is the one collectible that you, regardless if Buffett walked up and just wrote you $1 billion check, that you're like, nah, pass?
That I own or that I don't own?
Well, let's do both that you own.
That I own would probably be Charlie Munger wrote and signed a book to me like a month before he passed.
Oh, wow.
Kobe did as well, actually. And obviously, being a huge fan of Buffett and Munger and being a huge basketball fan,
Yeah.
Kobe's was for his book release in 2019, and then Munger was through a friend that told him that I was a big fan, and he was like, "Wow, someone that's 23 years old is a big fan. That's crazy."
That's awesome.
He loved it, and yeah, so those are two that I wouldn't sell. And then as far as stuff that I don't have, I've always wanted a T206 Honus Wagner, but they start at about 2.5 million. So maybe one day.
That's, what my Hannes Wagner story is my dad was not an athlete at all, but for some reason, the story that everyone probably has, but my mama was like, hey, Ian, I think I was 10 at the time. And she was like, hey, your dad had a bunch of baseball cards. And I was like, oh, this is the moment. Like, I'm going to get that skinny Hannes Wagner. And sure, it was not, it was all garbage. It was a lot of old bubble gum and just nothing, no big winners. But yeah, that Hannes Wagner that's the pentacle.
That's the one. Yeah, there's only,
Yeah.
a couple dozen of them in the world.
Yeah, I love it. Well, look, Buster, this was exciting. I know we kind of went all over the place, but I think that's really says a lot about your brand and who you are, like the uniqueness of what you bring. And I think, from my perspective, what your agency brings is such tremendous value in a very difficult and confusing social media ecosystem, but how you and the team are just so simplistic on, like, it's test, it's format, it's content. I wish you the most success, and one day hopefully we're close enough friends that I get to see that SpongeBob original piece. You can
You can
blindfold
see it
me.
whenever. Yeah.
You can blindfold me
Thanks,
to get
man.
to it.
I love it. Thank you.
All right, my friend.